It is a book about why the video game industry is so volatile and what happens to people when game studios shut down and how they move on, how they feel, how they recover. It tells a bunch of human stories and kind of tries to capture some of the issues that the video game industry faces and then tries to present some solutions to those issues. Why is the video game industry, even as it makes exponentially more money every single year, so have such a tough time keeping its workers happy and stable and employed?
How did you decide you were going to write about, studio closures versus focusing on layoffs or crunch or any of the other issues that you've written about before?
It is a book about volatility, and I think that for all the attention we pay to crunch, which is a good thing, and excessive overtime is definitely a problem in the games industry, I think that it's the volatility that drives people out. It's the thought of having to take a new job every 2 years, having to move across the world, move to new cities every single time. As the pandemic started and it suddenly became clear that more and more people would have to be remote, and eventually most of, if not the entire video game industry, at least in North America, was remote, it became more of like a question of, is this sustainable long term, and like what are companies going to do moving forward?
It might change the way that studios handle relocation, is what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that just the idea of like, okay, if I'm in a studio, because like maybe there's no way to prevent a studio from shutting down. Maybe there's no way to have stopped like Irrational Games from shutting down. Maybe it was always going to shut down. But if I'm working at Irrational Games and I'm in Boston and I love Boston and I don't want to move my family out of Boston, my options are either like go indie, go to another industry, or work remotely for another company. And if like suddenly that wasn't an option in the past, but if suddenly now moving forward it's an option, the industry becomes a lot more approachable and accessible and sustainable. If I'm no longer after having to move across the country every time I need a new job, maybe I can actually have a career at this thing and just work remotely the whole time.
When you're describing the video game industry in your book, I couldn't help but think about the journalism industry. And do you think there are some similarities there in terms of those work conditions or volatility?
Yeah, no, definitely. The thing about media and journalism in general is that there's a lot of failing business models in journalism, and there's a lot of like the ad model has just been devoured by Facebook and Google, and so we've seen a lot of media companies suffer as a result. There are a lot of media companies that just have struggled because they aren't able to make enough money. Whereas in video games, the games revenue has just gone up and up and up and up. Like this is I think the latest figure I saw is $180 billion industry. So this is an industry where like a lot of people are making a lot of money, unlike media where it's a little more understandable when people can't, when companies struggle. In games, the fact that like there's this volatility while the industry as a whole is making like obscene amounts of money, that to me is really the biggest difference between this and media.
But what do you think needs to kind of happen for developers to be able to find stable, like financially secure jobs while not crunching to the max? Is that even possible? What do you think?
So crunch is one issue, stability is another issue. There are a few solutions I explored. The one that I think is gonna be the most important and the most pressing and the most effective is people organizing and creating unions within the video game industry, which, I mean, it's kind of silly that still hasn't happened. It's kind of weird that it still hasn't happened. Workers should have a seat at the table and be able to have some sort of influence and say as to how the company that they operate moves forward. If you look at situations that we've seen recently, like where a game studio suddenly shut down and nobody saw it coming at all, like Telltale Games most recently, or 38 Studios, just the fact that can happen and people can just be left completely screwed because they don't even get severance or anything like that, it isn't going to stop the company from shutting down, but a union contract could force the company to wind things down a couple of months earlier and give people proper severance and proper notice rather than suddenly abruptly shutting down because they ran out of money. I think that is really essential.